My name is Stella Brooks, a 65-year-old widow living in a quiet neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. My life seemed to have settled into a predictable rhythm, cooking breakfast for my son Stephen, taking care of my grandson Matthew, and occasionally calling my younger son, Ivan, the boy who dreamed of being a pilot since childhood and had now made that dream a reality. This house, once filled with the laughter of my husband, Raphael, was now filled with the cheerful chatter of my 7-year-old grandson and the presence of my daughter-in-law, Araceli. I thought the rest of my days would be peaceful, free of turmoil. But then, on one ordinary morning, a single phone call tore everything apart. That day, the sky was a clear blue, with pale sunlight streaming through the curtains. I was busy washing dishes after breakfast. Stephen had already left for work early, and Matthew had just been picked up by the school bus. It was just me and Araceli in the house. Her voice floated down as she walked up the stairs. "Mom, I'm going to take a quick shower." I nodded, responding with a familiar smile. "Okay, take your time, dear." The sound of running water drifted down from upstairs, a steady, familiar background tune. I had just put the last plate on the shelf when the landline rang loudly. That familiar sound suddenly made me feel restless, as if I were about to hear some momentous news. I quickly wiped my hands on my apron and picked up the receiver. "Mom!" Ivan's voice came through, youthful and clear. I felt an immediate sense of relief. It had been a long time since he'd called me in the middle of a trip. "Ivan, where are you?" I asked with a laugh, feeling as if a warmth was spreading through my whole body. "I'm at the airport, getting ready to fly to France. Just wanted to take a moment to call you." My heart fluttered with excitement. I asked him a few things about his work, about his flights. Ivan answered cheerfully, but then his voice suddenly dropped, becoming hesitant. "Mom, something strange happened. I just saw my sister-in-law here, right at the airport. She just boarded my flight, sitting in first class." I froze, then gave a weak laugh to reassure him. "You must have seen wrong. Your sister-in-law is here, in the house. She just told me she was going to take a shower." On the other end of the line, Ivan was silent. So silent I could hear his ragged breathing. Then his voice became a whisper, serious, and heavy as lead. "Mom, it's impossible. I'm even holding her passport right now. Someone dropped it near the boarding gate. I opened it to check, and it's her name and picture. And right now, I'm looking right at her, sitting next to a well-dressed, elegant man. They're talking very intimately." My hand was shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. I glanced up at the stairs, still clearly hearing the steady sound of running water. My mind screamed that Araceli was here, but my heart was pounding erratically. I tried to speak calmly. "Ivan, there must be some mistake. It's impossible to be in two places at once." "No. Mom, I'm positive. I saw her clearly." Ivan's voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. In that instant, a crazy thought flashed through my mind. If that's true, then who is in my bathroom? Suddenly, the sound of water from upstairs stopped. I flinched, my heart hammering in my chest. Before I could say another word, footsteps echoed down the stairs. Each step felt like a blow to my chest. "Mom, who's on the phone?" Araceli's voice called out, sweet and normal, just like any other day. I gripped the receiver tightly and quickly replied evasively, "Oh, just a friend of mine." I heard the bathroom door close, followed by silence. My heart still hadn't calmed its trembling. I clutched the receiver and whispered to Ivan, "Are you absolutely sure?" On the other end, Ivan's reply was as firm as steel. "Mom, I am looking at her right now. There is no mistake." I couldn't say anything more. My trembling hand hung up the phone. The living room was bright with sunlight from outside, but a thick darkness had fallen over my heart. I collapsed onto the couch, my body going limp as if a string had been cut. My breathing was heavy, as if a giant stone was pressing on my chest. In my own familiar home, everything suddenly felt alien. I looked up at the family photo hanging on the wall, Stephen and Araceli on their wedding day, their happy smiles, their arms around a tiny Matthew. That picture, once a source of pride, had suddenly turned into a mirror reflecting the gnawing suspicion consuming me. Could it be that my daughter-in-law was hiding a terrible secret? Could she be playing two roles in the same life? I felt goosebumps crawl all over my skin. But then the bedroom door creaked open, and Araceli came downstairs, her hair still wet, wearing a light blue dress. The gentle smile on her face forced me to muster a strained smile in return. "Mom, I'm going to the market. Do you need me to buy anything?" she asked, her voice natural as if nothing had happened. My throat was tight. I forced myself to swallow and answered softly, "Yes. Get some tomatoes for me." She nodded and picked up her basket. Her familiar figure disappeared behind the gate. I stood frozen at the doorway, a gust of wind carrying in dusty sunlight, but my heart was cold. A single question swirled in my mind. If Araceli was on a flight to France with another man, then who was the person who had just smiled at me, who had just greeted me with that familiar voice? In that moment, I knew my quiet life had been changed forever. That afternoon, the house was filled with light, but to me, it felt darker than ever. I sat at the dining table, staring at the bright red tomatoes Araceli had just bought from the market, their fresh scent still lingering. She was cheerfully chopping them, her smile gentle. "Mom, the market was so crowded today, but I managed to get the good tomatoes you like." I nodded, my lips moving, wanting to say something, but my throat was dry. All I could hear was Ivan's voice echoing in my head. I'm looking at her, right in front of me. I tried to hide the turmoil inside me with a weak smile. Araceli didn't notice a thing. She put the basket in the corner of the kitchen, then started washing vegetables while humming a familiar tune. I watched her slender hands, her skillful movements, and everything felt so real, so close. But that only made my confusion worse. That evening, Stephen came home late. As he sat down at the dinner table, Araceli attentively served him soup, asking about his day. There were no signs of anything unusual, only I sat there, a storm raging inside me. I carefully observed her every gesture, every glance, hoping to find a small crack. But everything was perfect. Night fell, and the house grew quiet. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. In the darkness, memories of strange moments from the past began to surface. I remembered once seeing Araceli write a shopping list, her handwriting neat and even. But just a few days later, I saw her scribbling a note for Matthew with crooked, sloppy letters. When I asked, she laughed lightly. "I'm just practicing writing with my left hand for fun." At the time, I let it go. But now, thinking back, a shiver went down my spine. I remembered another time when Matthew ran to me, tattling, "Grandma, today Mommy wrote in my notebook with her left hand, and it was so messy. But yesterday, she wrote so beautifully." I had just laughed and comforted him, but a part of me had found it odd. Now, those fragmented memories were connecting, forming a dark picture. I got up, turned on the table lamp, and found an old notebook. With a trembling hand, I opened the first page and wrote, 11 a.m. Araceli goes to the market. Mood is gentle and cheerful. Handwriting changes sometimes neat, sometimes sloppy. Mood swings are erratic, one day sweet, the next day harsh. Each line felt like a knife cut to my heart. I didn't know what I was doing, only that I couldn't turn a blind eye anymore. If I didn't write them down, these details would vanish like a dream. The next day, everything proceeded as usual. Matthew chattered about his drawings. Stephen rushed off to work. Araceli smiled as she cleaned. But to me, every action was now shrouded in suspicion. I noticed Araceli carrying the vegetable basket with her left hand. Though she was usually right-handed, I saw her smile seem forced when Stephen talked about work, different from her usual natural grin. In the afternoon, I went over to Mrs. Collins's house, my neighbor of several decades. She was returning the plate Araceli had brought over the day before. As she handed it to me, she remarked, "Your daughter-in-law has been strange lately. One day she's cheerful, the next she's cold. Yesterday she gave me this plate with her left hand, which surprised me because I've always known her to be right-handed." Hearing her, I managed a weak smile, but inside, my heart clenched. When I got back home, I immediately wrote in my notebook, "Mrs. Collins said, sometimes uses her left hand to hand things over." The pages of the notebook filled up, each detail a needle piercing my chest. For the second night in a row, I couldn't sleep. The ticking of the clock seemed to emphasize every second of doubt. I remembered Araceli's smile on her wedding day, the sparkle in her eyes as she held a newborn Matthew, the cozy family dinners. I had once thought myself lucky to have such a wonderful daughter-in-law, but now the shadow of deceit was casting itself over everything. I didn't dare say anything to Stephen. He was already exhausted from work, and I was afraid my words would make him collapse. But I knew this silence was also eating away at me, day by day. The next morning, as Araceli saw Matthew off at the bus stop, I watched from inside the house. She bent down to tie his shoelaces with her left hand, her movements clumsy, completely different from her usual dexterity. Matthew waved goodbye cheerfully. I watched the scene, an indescribable sense of dread rising within me. When she came back inside, I quietly opened my notebook and added another line. Tied Matthew's shoes with her left hand, movements were awkward. I closed the notebook, my hand clenched tightly. I didn't know what path I was walking down, but I was certain that from now on, I would not let a single detail escape me. In the quiet house, I heard Araceli's footsteps returning. She smiled gently and asked me what I wanted for lunch. I looked straight into her eyes, my heart turbulent. From that moment on, I knew I had begun a new journey, a journey of suspicion. The next morning, as I was making tea in the kitchen, Matthew came running in, his backpack, bigger than half his body, bouncing with each step. He looked up at me with his bright eyes, his voice excited. "Grandma, yesterday Mom wrote some words in my notebook, and they were so pretty. But today she wrote with her other hand, and it was super ugly." I froze, the sugar spoon in my hand almost slipping. I sat down and pulled the notebook out of his backpack. It was just as he said. One page had neat, careful handwriting. The next page was slanted and clumsy. I forced a smile and stroked his hair. "Maybe your mom was busy today, so she wrote in a hurry." Matthew wrinkled his nose in protest. "No way, she even used her left hand. I saw her. But yesterday, it was her right hand, and it was as pretty as print." The child's innocent words were another knife twisting in my heart. I patted his back to soothe him, but inside, every nerve was stretched taut, clinging to a truth I didn't dare to name. In the afternoon, I went to Mr. Johnson's bakery to buy some pastries for Matthew. As he was arranging cakes in the display case, he greeted me with a friendly smile. "Mrs. Brooks, the other day your daughter-in-law stopped by. She was all smiles and even complimented my pastries. But this morning, She came in with a face as cold as ice, bought her things, and left without a word. I thought I might have done something to offend her. I tried to force a smile. She was probably just tired. Joe. But inside, I felt my knees go weak. The same person, the same shop. Yet her demeanor was as different as two strangers. I wrote this down in my notebook as soon as I got home. Mr. Johnson said, sometimes cheerful, sometimes cold. The notebook grew thicker, my handwriting shaky, but each stroke confirmed one thing. I was no longer alone in my suspicion. That evening, Matthew was doing his homework in the living room. I sat beside him, pretending to knit, but my eyes followed every move Araceli made as she cleaned the kitchen. The boy suddenly looked up and said in a small voice, just loud enough for me to hear, "Grandma, I don't get it. Some days Mom is so nice. She hugs me really tight and sings to me, but on other days, she won't even look at me and even scolds me." I swallowed a lump in my throat and forced a smile. "Your mom is probably just busy with work. Don't be sad, sweetie." But his innocent eyes, clear as day, seemed to look straight into the doubt in my heart. A 7-year-old child had sensed his mother's erratic changes, so how could I dismiss it as just a woman's mood swings? The next day, as I was watering the flowers in the yard, Mrs. Jenkins, the vegetable seller from the market, stopped by. She handed me a basket of fresh vegetables and then said with some hesitation, "Mrs. Stella, I've noticed your daughter-in-law is very different lately. One day, she's so friendly and asks about my family. The next, she walks right past me like she doesn't know me. I didn't want to say anything, but it's really strange." I stood there silently, only managing to mumble, "She's probably just busy." Mrs. Jenkins sighed softly and left. I watched her go, still holding the bundle of green vegetables, my heart heavy. I knew it wasn't just me. The neighbors, friends, even a child could see it. Only Stephen, my son, remained oblivious, lost in the blind faith that his wife was perfect. That night, I opened the notebook and added another line. Mrs. Jenkins, one day friendly, one day cold. The pages were filled with shaky handwriting, each story from those around me like a knife cut, carving the reality deeper, late at night, when the house was silent. I sat alone by the window. The moonlight spilled onto the old tiled floor, and a cold draft slipped through the crack in the window. I hugged the notebook to my chest and whispered, as if talking to myself, "If it's not the same person, then who is it?" My heart pounded erratically, more and more. It felt like there were two people wearing Araceli's face, one gentle, one a stranger, and I, the only one brave enough to document it, was standing before a mystery my aging mind had never imagined. I started living with the small notebook as if it were a life raft. Every time Araceli did something out of the ordinary, I immediately wrote it down. Even the smallest details, the way she held her teacup, the way she called Matthew's name, or a fleeting smile, all became shaky lines on the page. At first, I felt like a crazy person, secretly observing my daughter-in-law and then quickly scribbling notes. But the more I wrote, the more I saw an unusual pattern. She would be sweet in the morning, then irritable in the afternoon, and by nightfall, she would become gentle again. A person couldn't change that quickly. At least, I had never seen it. One day, while clearing the dinner table, I noticed how Araceli held her knife. She was right-handed, but that day she held it with her left, her movements awkward, cutting the meat into uneven, thick and thin slices. I stared so intently that she turned to me and asked, "Mom, is something wrong?" I was startled and shook my head. "No, I was just lost in thought." That very night, I wrote, "Cut meat with her left hand, clumsily." Each line was like a piece of a puzzle, gradually revealing some mysterious shape. The next day, I happened to see a small notebook in her handbag. When she went out, I secretly took a look. Inside were a few lines of scrawled handwriting, unlike the usual script of Araceli. I quickly closed it, my heart pounding as if I were about to be caught. I knew it was wrong, but curiosity pulled me beyond my limits. That evening, when the family gathered, Araceli laughed and talked normally, but I no longer felt at ease. Her presence felt like a skillfully worn mask. Every time she smiled, I remembered the sloppy handwriting, the cold look the neighbors had seen. One afternoon, while Matthew was playing with his building blocks, I sat at my desk and added to the notebook. 3 p.m. Araceli goes to the market with a red basket. 6 p.m. Returns with a blue basket, says the red one broke. Mood, rushed, seems to be hiding something. I wrote very slowly, as if carving each stroke into my memory. When I closed the notebook, I realized my hands were shaking so much I couldn't hold the pen steady. One night, I dreamed I walked into the kitchen and saw two Aracelis standing side by side, one gently cooking, the other turning her back with a scowl. I ran in a panic to find Stephen, but he was blind and couldn't see anything. I woke up with a start, my forehead drenched in sweat, and looked around the dark room. Outside, the wind made the window creak like a whisper. I understood that if I didn't document everything, I would gradually lose my way between reality and illusion. The notebook became the only map leading me to the truth. Another evening, when Stephen came home late, Araceli blamed him, her voice shrill and completely different from her usual gentleness. I sat in the corner, memorizing her words. "You only ever think about work. I'm tired of it." But the very next day, she prepared breakfast for Stephen with a sweet smile. "Eat up. You probably have a busy day ahead." The swift change sent a chill down my spine. I was no longer sure if I was living with one daughter-in-law or two. That night, with everyone asleep, I sat under the table lamp and wrote a long entry. Erratic mood swings. Voice is sometimes high-pitched, sometimes low and warm. One gentle Araceli, one cold Araceli. I looked at the words I had just written, my eyes blurring with tears. I no longer knew what the truth was. One day, I tried to probe. I asked, "Araceli, do you remember the lullaby I used to sing to Matthew, the one, Cielito Lindo?" She paused, looking momentarily flustered, then smiled. "Of course, Mom. I still sing it to him." But that night, as I listened from the next room, I heard Matthew whisper, "Grandma, Mommy didn't sing tonight. She sang yesterday, but tonight she just told me to go to sleep on my own." I immediately wrote it in my notebook. Sang the lullaby yesterday, but not today. And so it went. One small detail after another piling up. I knew I had gone too far, but I couldn't stop. Every time I sat with my notebook, I was both terrified and determined. I was afraid of what terrible thing I might uncover, but I also knew that if I didn't continue, I would forever live in a fog of suspicion. Some nights, I would press the notebook to my chest, listening to my racing heart. I wondered, am I the one going insane? Or is the truth so monstrous that only I am sensitive enough to notice it? In our seemingly peaceful home, I had silently become the chronicler, the sole witness to a secret that even I could not yet name. One morning, just as the sun was rising, I put on my old shawl and left the house with a heavy heart. In my hand was the thick notebook, filled with the shaky words I wrote every night. I couldn't keep it all inside anymore. The only person I trusted enough to share this with was Carol, my best friend since we were young women. the one who had witnessed nearly every turn in my life. The coffee shop on the corner was as quiet as it had been for years. The old wooden door creaked as I pushed it open. The smell of freshly roasted coffee filled the air, pulling me back to the days when we used to chat after school. Carol was already there, her smile as warm as ever, but her eyes couldn't hide her concern when she saw my haggard face. "Stella, just looking at you, I know something is terribly wrong. Tell me, what's been weighing on you so heavily?" I sat down, my hands clutching a hot cup of coffee. The warmth spread to my fingertips, but my heart remained cold. After a long moment, I opened the notebook and pushed it toward Carol. I've written it all down. Every little detail, every strange change in my daughter-in-law. I don't know if I'm still sane. Carol, but look, this is what I've seen. Carol flipped through the pages, her brow furrowed, her lips pressed tightly together. In the quiet cafe, the only sound was a spoon clinking against a glass. After a while, she looked up, her voice firm. "Stella, you are not imagining things. It's clear something is wrong. A person can't change their personality so quickly. You were right to write it all down." Her validation was like a cool drink of water, quenching my thirst. For days, I had been tormented by the fear that I was losing my mind, and now, at least someone believed me. I trembled slightly, tears welling up. But what should I do? I'm afraid Stephen will collapse if he finds out the truth. I'm afraid this family will fall apart. Carol took my hand, her voice slow but steady. "You can't pretend forever. The longer you stay silent, the more brutal the truth will be when it explodes. If you have to, follow her. Don't let blind love cloud your judgment. You have to protect Stephen and Matthew." I nodded, feeling as if I had just been thrown a rope in the middle of a chasm. That afternoon, on my way home, I stopped by Mrs. Collins's house. She offered me a cup of tea and then suddenly said, "Stella, your daughter-in-law was so friendly when she greeted me yesterday, but today she walked right past me without a glance. I don't want to gossip, but she really is so inconsistent." I remained silent, only managing a forced smile. But as I walked home, my heart pounded. It wasn't just me, not just Carol. The neighbors saw it too. This truth was becoming undeniable. That night, Stephen returned home, exhausted, at dinner. Araceli smiled gently, graciously serving him food, but I noticed her hand trembled slightly as she held her chopsticks. Her gaze seemed to wander when Stephen talked about his work. In that moment, I saw a clear crack in her perfect mask. After dinner, I went to my room, opened my notebook, and added, "Smiled gently," but her hand trembled. Gaze drifted while listening to Stephen. The dense lines of text made me shiver. I realized I had become a detective in my own home. On Sunday, Carol made a surprise visit. She looked at me intently and then said directly, "Stella, you have to prepare yourself. If the truth comes out, you'll need evidence. You'll need people on your side. I will be your witness if needed. You are not alone." I was choked with emotion and hugged my friend's shoulders. For so many years, Carol had been by my side. Today, more than ever, I knew I needed that strength. Late that night, after everyone was asleep, I went out to the garden. The bright moon shone down on the chrysanthemum bushes I had planted when I was young. I sat on the stone bench, clutching the notebook to my chest. The wind rustled the pages, like the whisper of a truth that refused to reveal itself. I closed my eyes and remembered Carol's words, "Don't let blind love cloud your judgment." From that moment, I understood that my journey had entered a new chapter. I would no longer just be an observer. I had to become a seeker of the truth. Late that night, after everyone had fallen asleep, I quietly got out of bed. Moonlight streamed through the window, stretching across the floor like a silver ribbon. In my hand, the notebook felt as heavy as a stone, each page soaked with sweat and fear. I crept down the stairs, each creak of the floorboards making my heart jump. I sat in a chair in the living room, the dim yellow light of the table lamp casting a glow on my veiny hands. I opened the notebook and reread everything, the strange changes, the trivial details I had recorded. Each line felt like a knife cutting deeper into my soul. I heard the wind whistling through the cracks in the door, but then, suddenly, there was a soft noise from upstairs, the creak of a door. I snapped my head up, my heart pounding. Araceli's silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes glinting in the darkness. "Mom, are you still awake?" Her voice floated down, strange, both gentle and chilling. I quickly closed the notebook, hiding it under my thigh. I just couldn't sleep. "Where are you going at this hour?" She smiled enigmatically and descended the stairs, one step at a time. The moonlight fell on her face, half lit, half in shadow, sending a shiver down my spine. "I'm thirsty. You shouldn't stay up so late either." I nodded, saying nothing more. She walked past me, a familiar scent of perfume wafting by, but strangely, it wasn't her usual scent. It was a strong, unfamiliar fragrance, like a sign of someone else. As she poured a glass of water in the kitchen, I tremblingly opened my notebook and added a line. "Came down to the kitchen in the middle of the night. Wore a different perfume." The next day, I decided to observe more closely. I woke up very early and went out to the garden, pretending to tend to the flowers. From the kitchen window, I watched Araceli prepare breakfast. At first, her movements were swift and careful, but in a flash, she became clumsy, dropping a spoon on the floor and then muttering in frustration. I silently logged it in my memory. Around noon, Stephen called to say he would be home late. I saw Araceli's eyes darken for a moment, her expression changing in the blink of an eye. When she turned to me, her gentle smile returned, as if nothing had happened. In the afternoon, Matthew ran home, excitedly announcing, "Grandma, Mom picked me up from school today, but she was different. She didn't ask me what I learned. She just grabbed my hand and pulled me along quickly." I quickly asked, "Are you sure it was Mom?" The boy nodded. "Yes, I'm sure. But she was strange, like she was in a hurry." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. A part of me was terrified. If there were two people with the same face, how would Matthew be able to tell the difference? That night, I went out onto the porch, watching the darkness swallow the garden. I remembered Carol's words, "You have to prepare evidence." But what evidence could be convincing enough? When even I wasn't sure I wasn't imagining things, a sound from inside the house pulled me from my thoughts. I quietly stepped inside, standing behind a wall and peering into the living room. Araceli was sitting there, her back to me, whispering on the phone to someone in a strange language. Her voice was low and rushed. I strained to listen, but only caught a few fragmented words. When she turned around, I managed to retreat into the shadows. I ran up to my room, closed the door, my heart pounding like it would burst. I opened my notebook and wrote with a shaky hand, "Phone call in the middle of the night." Strange voice. The page was blurred with tears. I knew there was no turning back. This house, once a warm home, now felt like a dark labyrinth where the shadow of truth lurked in every corner. Late that night, I heard footsteps pacing in the hallway. I held my breath and peeked through the crack in the door. Araceli was standing there, silent, seemingly listening to the rhythm of breathing in the room. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I forced myself to close my eyes and pretend to be asleep. The footsteps gradually faded, but the fear remained deeply etched in every cell of my body. I knew the darkness in this house came not just from the night, but from the secret I was approaching. And I also knew that sooner or later, I would have to face it directly. That morning, just as I opened the window to let in the sunlight, I suddenly heard an argument in the kitchen. Araceli's voice was shrill, high-pitched, completely different from her usual gentleness. "You can't just let your mother interfere in everything. I feel suffocated." Stephen was silent for a moment. Then his weary voice replied, "What are you talking about? Araceli. My mom hasn't done anything. She just wants to help." I stood frozen behind the door, my heart clenching. That voice, that harshness, I had never heard it from my daughter-in-law. But just moments later, when she stepped out of the kitchen, her face was completely different. A gentle smile, a loving gaze. "Mom, I just made coffee for you. Drink it before it gets cold." I took the cup, my lips trembling. I looked deep into her eyes, searching for a trace of the anger from moments before, but it had all vanished, as if it had never existed. That afternoon, I went to the market to buy some vegetables. On my way back, Mrs. Jenkins pulled me aside and whispered, "Stella, this morning I ran into your daughter-in-law. She greeted me so cheerfully, but at noon I saw her at the market again with a strange man. She looked at me but didn't say hello. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I'm sure it was her." I managed to force a smile, thanked her, and hurried home. My heart felt heavy as lead. I opened my notebook and added, "Morning, cheerfully greeted Mrs. Jenkins. Noon, with a strange man, cold demeanor." The lines of text stretched into evidence that even I was afraid to read. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, Matthew said casually, "Grandma, today's mommy isn't like yesterday's mommy. Yesterday she smiled at me. Today she looked at me strangely." Araceli chuckled and patted his head. "What are you talking about, sweetie? Mommy always smiles at you." Stephen laughed it off, thinking it was just a child's imagination. But I knew that children are sometimes more perceptive than adults. I quietly placed my hand on Matthew's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement that I believed him. Late at night, when Stephen was fast asleep, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I peeked through the crack in the door and saw Araceli looking at herself in the living room mirror. The lamplight cast a cold, unfamiliar look on her face. She studied herself for a long time, then smirked, a half-smile that sent a chill down my spine. I held my breath and retreated into my room, my heart pounding like a drum. The next morning, when I saw Araceli busy preparing breakfast with a gentle face, I wanted to scream that I had seen a different person last night, but I stayed silent. I was scared. In the afternoon, Carol called me. Her voice was firm. "Stella, you must be careful. It's clear there are two faces in one person. Stay calm, but don't ignore it. You have to be prepared for when everything falls apart." I clutched the phone, tears streaming down my face. I whispered back, "I'm afraid that day is not far off. Carol." That night, I opened my notebook and wrote slowly, "One gentle Araceli, one stranger." The crack in the mask is becoming more visible. When I put down the pen, I realized my hand was shaking so much I couldn't write in a straight line. I looked up at the dark ceiling, a haunting question echoing in my mind. When will that mask fall? And will I have the strength to look the truth in the face when it appears? Late in the afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the roof, I sat on the porch, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Inside, a relentless wave of anxiety washed over me. I knew I couldn't just sit and watch. I needed concrete evidence, something no one could deny. When Araceli went to the grocery store, I snuck into her room, My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. I opened her makeup drawer. It was filled with cosmetics, so neat it was almost artificial. I took a breath and then opened her closet. The clothes were tidy, but at the very bottom, there was a small bag. I tremblingly pulled it out. Inside was an old wooden box, its lock rusted. I hesitated for a moment, then used a small knife I had hidden in my pocket to pry it open. Inside was a passport. I froze when I saw the photo. It was Araceli, but the name was different. Isabella Torres. The birth date was different. The place of birth was different. I quickly flipped through other documents, flight tickets, hotel receipts from New York, all under the name Isabella. My hand trembled violently. I quickly put everything back, locked the box, and stuffed it back at the bottom of the closet as if no one had touched it. My heart was still pounding when I heard the front door open. Araceli was back. I rushed out of the room, pretending to be wiping the hallway window. She looked at me, her eyes searching. But then she smiled. "Mom, isn't the weather beautiful today?" I forced a smile, trying to hide my fear. But inside, I knew I had just touched the first layer of the secret. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat under the table lamp and wrote in my notebook, found another passport in the closet. Name Isabella Torres. Flight tickets, hotel receipts from New York. As I finished writing, my tears fell onto the page, smudging the ink. I asked myself, who is Araceli really? Does she have a twin sister, or is she living a double life? The next morning, I tried to probe. As the family ate breakfast, I said casually, "Yesterday, I read in the paper about a famous model named Isabella Torres. She looks a lot like our daughter-in-law." Araceli froze for a split second, then laughed. "Mom, you must be seeing things. I don't have any famous relatives." Her laugh was natural, but her eyes flashed with a hint of suspicion. I fell silent, putting more food on Matthew's plate. But inside, a storm was raging. In the afternoon, Carol called. I whispered to her about the passport, about the strange name. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said, "Stella, this is serious. If you have to, you might need a lawyer. But first, protect yourself and Matthew." I held the phone, my hand shaking uncontrollably. Carol's words strengthened my resolve, but also my fear. That evening, as I was washing dishes, Araceli walked into the kitchen. She came close, her eyes boring into mine. "Mom, is something wrong lately? You seem different." I forced a smile. "No, I'm just tired." She placed her hand on my shoulder, a light but chilling touch. "Don't worry about anything, Mom. I'll take care of everyone." I swallowed hard and nodded. But as she turned away, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Late at night, I sat alone, looking at the thick notebook. I knew I had an important clue, but the closer I got to the truth, the thicker the darkness surrounding me became. A question pounded in my head, repeating like a hammer blow. Who is the person living in this house, Araceli or Isabella? That morning, I took Matthew to the bus stop and then returned home. The sky was clear blue, but my heart felt like it was covered in gray clouds. I silently watched Araceli in the kitchen. She wore a pale yellow dress, her face calm, her movements so graceful that I had to ask myself, is this really the person whose documents I found with a different name? While she was washing vegetables, the phone in her purse buzzed. She startled, quickly answered it, and then stepped out onto the porch. I held my breath, moving closer to the slightly ajar window. Her voice was low and rushed. "No," I said next week. "Stop calling, it's too risky." I strained to hear more, but only caught a few strange words before she came back inside. As soon as she saw me, she broke into a bright smile. "Mom, The weather is so lovely today. Maybe we should eat in the garden." I managed a nod, my heart racing. I wrote it down in my notebook as soon as I had the chance. Phone call, said next week. Voice was rushed. In the afternoon, I went to the supermarket. As I was picking out fruit, I overheard two women behind me gossiping. "Yesterday, I saw Miss Torres with a Spanish man. Very elegant. They make a beautiful couple." I whipped around. The two women didn't know me and continued their conversation. The name Torres struck my heart like a knife. I quickly left, clutching my shopping basket to hide my trembling. When I got home, I opened my notebook. Someone referred to Araceli as Torres. Seen with a Spanish man, the dark ink on the page made me feel like I couldn't breathe. That evening, Stephen returned. Araceli smiled and talked as usual, inviting him to the dinner table. I watched the scene with a sharp pain in my heart. How would Stephen react if he knew his wife had two names, two faces? He had always trusted her, always defended her. I was scared, but also angry on my son's behalf. During the meal, Matthew suddenly asked, "Mommy, did your sister pick me up from school today? I saw someone who looked just like you, but you were at home with Grandma." The table fell silent. I held my breath. Araceli burst out laughing and gently pinched the boy's cheek. "Are you daydreaming again? It must have been someone who just looks like me." Stephen also laughed and reassured his son. But my eyes met Matthew's for a fleeting moment. His innocent gaze seemed to confirm he was sure of what he saw. That night, I couldn't bear it anymore. I gathered all my courage and called Carol. I told her everything about the passport, the phone call, what Matthew had said. On the other end, Carol was silent for a long time before saying, "Stella, this is no longer just a suspicion. This is a clear web of lies. You have to be prepared. Have you thought about telling Stephen?" I sighed, my voice trembling. "I'm scared, Carol. I'm afraid he won't believe me, that he'll turn against me." Carol was firm. "You can't stay silent forever. One day, everything will explode, and if you don't have solid proof, you'll be made out to be the crazy one. Your notes aren't enough. You have to find a way to get real evidence." I clutched the phone, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. But I knew Carol was right. Late that night, I sat alone at my desk and opened my notebook. The flickering lamplight cast my long shadow on the wall. I wrote, "The web of lies is becoming clearer. Must find solid proof." As the pen touched the last page, I realized my hand was no longer shaking. Perhaps the fear had transformed into something else, a vague but burning determination. I looked up at my reflection in the mirror on the wall. My face was old, lined with wrinkles, but my eyes were brighter than ever. I whispered, "All right. If Araceli or Isabella is hiding a secret, then I will be the one to expose it." The next morning, I decided to do something I had never dared to imagine before: follow Araceli. My heart pounded as I watched her get ready, telling me she was going to the market. I nodded, pretending not to care. But as soon as she was out of sight, I grabbed my old coat, a small purse, and quietly followed her. I kept a distance of a few blocks between us, walking slowly, trying to blend in with the crowd. Araceli walked quickly, her red basket swinging at her side. But then, instead of turning toward the market as usual, she took a small road leading to a quiet part of town. I stopped, my heart clenching with anxiety. She stopped in front of a small coffee shop. I hid on the other side of the street, behind the window of an old bookstore. I clearly saw her sit down at a table, and immediately, a man approached. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit. They shook hands, their eyes meeting with a familiarity that spoke of a long acquaintance. I strained to see, watching Araceli's lips move. I couldn't hear anything, but her expression was a mix of tension and intimacy. The man handed her a thick envelope. She took it and quickly hid it in her basket. In that moment, I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the space around me. I stumbled back, my steps unsteady. If I wasn't careful, she would spot me. I turned and walked away, but the pounding of my heart echoed in my ears. When I got home, I immediately opened my notebook, met a strange man in a coffee shop, received an envelope, hid it in her basket. Tears blurred the words. I knew I was getting closer to the truth, but it also meant putting myself in danger. That evening, as the family sat down to dinner, I watched Araceli. She still smiled, still served Stephen food, still gently soothed Matthew, but I could see the red basket placed in the corner of the room. I wanted to rush over and rip it open in front of everyone, but my reason held me back. Without a plan, I would be walking into my own demise. After dinner, Stephen went to make a call to a colleague, and Matthew ran into his room to play. I was left alone with Araceli in the kitchen. She turned, putting the red basket away in a cabinet. Her eyes flickered over me, a searching look in them. "Mom, are you tired? Why do you keep staring at me like that?" she asked, her voice sweet, but with a hidden blade. I forced a smile, trying to remain calm. "No, I was just thinking about what to cook tomorrow." She smiled, but I saw a slight twitch at the corner of her lips, like someone hiding a secret. That night, I called Carol. My voice trembled. "Carol, I saw her meet a man, take an envelope. I'm afraid I can't handle this much longer." She was silent for a long moment, then replied firmly, "Stella, it's time you got a real ally. I'm going to introduce you to a lawyer. This person is discreet and can help you gather evidence legally. You can't fight this darkness alone." Hearing that, I broke down and cried. The tears were a mix of fear and relief, for I was finally no longer alone. When I hung up, I looked around the dark house. The picture frames on the wall seemed to scrutinize me, reminding me that all happiness could vanish in the blink of an eye. I hugged the notebook to my chest and whispered in the darkness, "If the truth is a trap, I must still walk into it. I will not let my family drown in lies any longer." Not long after Carol helped me get in touch with a discreet lawyer, the tide seemed to turn, but not in the way I had hoped. The shadow I was trying to expose began to fight back, and it did so with a cunning I never thought a daughter-in-law could possess. One gloomy afternoon, as I was organizing my notebook, the front door burst open. Araceli strode in with an unusual air, confident, almost arrogant. Beside her was a woman in a suit, standing poised with a large leather briefcase. I recognized that professional look, a lawyer. Before I could process it, Araceli was standing in front of me, her eyes as sharp as daggers. "Mom," she said, her voice smooth, "since you started following me, I sought legal advice. They informed me that such behavior could constitute domestic harassment and invasion of privacy." She smirked, gesturing toward the notebook on my table, and a soft chuckle escaped my throat. "You even dared to go through my personal belongings, opening my drawers, rummaging through my things. That's a violation. I don't want this to get messy, but if you continue, I will be forced to take action." I felt my heart constrict. Her words were cold, laced with a terrifying calculation. She wasn't explaining. She wasn't afraid. She was attacking. And with just one phrase, "I will be forced to take action." A chilling wind blew through me. Court, files, the law, things I had no experience with. I was an old mother. How could I fight back? Araceli's lawyer, she introduced herself as Margaret Hale, spoke politely but sharply, She recited a few legal clauses, using words I'd only heard in movies: invasion of privacy, harassment, temporary restraining order, no contact. Those words were like cold bricks, building a wall of isolation between me and my family. Hale proposed a condition. You should cease all surveillance activities. All contact must go through your daughter-in-law's legal counsel. If you wish to see Stephen, you must go through legal channels. Her tone was formal, devoid of sympathy. Araceli looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time in months, I saw not a gentle wife or a friendly daughter-in-law, but a warrior armed with legal ammunition. "Mom," she continued, "I don't want to hurt this family, but if you continue to cause trouble, I will file for a restraining order, and if necessary, I will proceed with a request for temporary custody of my son on the grounds of an unsafe environment." The last phrase was like a thunderclap. Unsafe environment. She was using a tactic to make Stephen, the court. Everyone believed that I was a danger to my own grandchild, a crazy, spying grandmother. I knew she was setting the stage to flip the narrative, turning the keeper of the truth into the harasser. It was the strategy of a clever antagonist. When you can't hide the secret, you make the one trying to expose it seem unreliable. She was burying the truth under a mountain of suspicion. The next day, those tactics became clearer. I woke up to a letter in a crisp envelope. Demand to cease and desist all infringing activities. It was a document drafted by Ms. Hale, filled with legal warnings. I held the letter, my heart cold and trembling. Each legal term was like hail on my roof, shaking everything I had ever relied on. Not only that, a few days later, a small file appeared in Stephen's inbox, an anonymous email sent to his workplace, stating that his mother was exhibiting strange behavior, including stalking and harassment. The sender used details I had recorded in my notebook, private information cited as evidence, and Stephen, his spirit weakened by exhaustion, began to waver. I saw him glance at me occasionally, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and doubt. My hasty explanations couldn't erase the image being painted, a mother accused of harassing her own family. The situation had been turned on its head. Araceli had forced me onto the defensive, making everyone ask, is she being too extreme? They didn't see the passports, the meeting at the coffee shop. They only saw the voice of a lawyer, a polished presentation, and a young, charming woman of social standing who claimed she was being disturbed. The trap grew cruder. Araceli began using my own son as a shield. She whispered to Stephen about her concerns for Matthew, about the need to keep the peace, about how the family is being disrupted by these unusual behaviors. Stephen, always soft-hearted, began to lean toward his wife. I saw his indecision, saw him holding his head while reading the emails, saw him avoid me when I tried to explain. Moreover, she projected a friendly smile to the neighbors. In public, Araceli would appear with Charles, sometimes a sophisticated man making a brief appearance in a luxury car. People looked at them with admiration. They didn't see the mask behind the smile. Charles, with his wealth and influence, was silently effective. A few of his business partners offered quiet support, making the community close ranks even tighter. I felt isolated. All my efforts seemed insignificant against a legal machine and social influence. I was a widowed mother, not well versed in the law, without great wealth. But there was one thing I hadn't lost: my persistence and a notebook thick with evidence. And in that moment of desperation, one thing became clear. If I wanted to win, I couldn't fight with fragile emotions. I had to fight with intelligence, with the law, just as she had. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at my desk, the thick notebook and the threatening letter before me. I stacked the papers neatly, as if preparing for an attack. Araceli's counterattack had revealed one reality. She was cunning enough to turn the victim into the aggressor. But that same counterattack gave me an advantage. When an antagonist uses law and influence to hide, the one thing she cannot fake is authenticity, evidence, witnesses, facts. And those I could gather. I took a deep breath, pushing my sorrow into a corner where determination was forged into action. I would not be defeated by threats. If she wanted to play by the law, I would find a lawyer. If she wanted to win over the community, I would find real people to tell the truth. If she wanted to take my grandson, I would fight to the end. Once again, in the darkness of the house, I whispered to myself, "Let her make her move. I will not back down. I will be ready." After that night of intimidation from the lawyer's letter and anonymous emails, I lay awake for a long time. But before the sun even began to rise, one thing became clear. If I wanted to win, I could no longer do it alone. I needed someone with legal knowledge, witnesses who weren't afraid to speak the truth, and most importantly, someone who understood the situation and would stand with me in the confrontation to come. Carol kept her word. She called me in the morning, her voice as firm as ever. "Stella, I've contacted Rebecca. She's been a lawyer for a long time, specializing in family law and protecting children's rights. Rebecca said to get your documents ready. She'll meet with you tonight." When I heard that name, an unusual sense of relief washed over me. Rebecca, a middle-aged woman with cool but warm eyes, met me at her small office that afternoon. She invited me to sit, listening from beginning to end with her eyes fixed on mine, without a hint of condescension. As I started to tell my story, laying out the notebook pages, the passport, the flight tickets, she placed everything on her desk, studying them intently. She didn't offer any criticism, only asked direct, professional questions. "You have all these documents?" "I have the notebook, the passport, a few receipts, and the eyes of my neighbors." "Are you prepared for us to take official statements? Any surveillance you conducted will have to be documented according to the law, and we need a clear chain of evidence." I told her I was ready, but at the same time, I confessed my fear. I was afraid that when everything came out, my son would be broken. Rebecca looked at me with compassion. "We are working for the truth and for the child's best interests. If Araceli is using the law to cover things up, we will use the law to protect your family. But you must be prepared for a battle of words, evidence, and witnesses." Rebecca began to outline a strategy. First, gather all physical evidence: Isabella's passport, the flight tickets I found. My journal needed to be authenticated, meaning she would help me create an official affidavit, notarized to confirm the timeline. All witnesses, Mrs. Collins, Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Jenkins, Carol, had to write official statements, and most importantly, find the testimony of the person with Araceli's face, someone who could confirm they were being used, or at least confirm the existence of a double. I listened, my heart both trembling and steadfast. Rebecca continued, "If we can find the person who played the role of the double, and that person is willing to talk, that would be the most legitimate evidence." As she paused, I felt a flicker of hope. It was the very thought I had been quietly considering. Was there someone out there with my daughter-in-law's face? I remembered the alleys, the furtive footsteps, and the name Isabella on the passport. Rebecca didn't wait for me to say it twice. She summoned Carol as the first witness. She gave me statement forms for the neighbors to sign. She advised me not to do anything that could get me accused of harassment. She said, "Let our lawyers handle the evidence collection, following proper procedure." I complied, even though I wanted to rush out and find that person immediately. Carol was my seal of confidence. She brought Mrs. Collins and Mrs. Jenkins to Rebecca's office. They wrote their statements, signed their names, describing every change in Araceli, her gestures, her left-handed, right-handedness, her mood swings, the time she handed over the plate with her left hand. Mr. Johnson also showed up, his face red with emotion as he recounted, "Ma'am, I saw her smiling one day, and a few days later she glared through the door without a word. It was so different." Each statement was notarized, authenticated. Their stories were like puzzle pieces being collected in a box. But the most crucial piece was still missing. The person who could say they were hired to be a double. I told Rebecca about the alley, about the house at number 14 that I vaguely remembered seeing, about the trembling girl with my daughter-in-law's face. After listening, Rebecca's expression grew serious. "If you still know the address, let me send someone to investigate. We need to find that person. If she is indeed a victim, we need to protect her and get her testimony." That night, as I sat in silence clutching my notebook, anxiously waiting, the phone rang. It was Carol, her voice joyful. "Stella, Lucy, the friend you mentioned, has been in touch. She knows the person. She's willing to bring her to meet Rebecca. But you have to promise to protect them. They're scared." I felt as if the whole world converged in that moment, both terrified and exhilarated. Finally, I was no longer alone. Isadora appeared the next afternoon, a slender girl with teary eyes, her gaze avoidant. But when she looked directly at me, there was a profound sadness that made me want to hug her. She couldn't say much, only tremblingly handed Rebecca an envelope. Inside were a few papers, photos she had kept. When Rebecca gently questioned her, she sighed and explained she had been hired by Araceli to stand in for her on a few occasions, for the reason of helping the family, and each time she received money, she took it home to buy medicine for her elderly mother. Her words cut into my heart. She wasn't a master deceiver. She was a victim of a cold calculation. Rebecca listened, then said in a gentle but firm voice, "We will protect you. Your evidence and her testimony, if collected legally, will form a strong case." Isadora cried, but her tears were the first step toward revealing the truth. In the days that followed, Rebecca and her team collected all the documents, photographed Isabella's passport, verified the entry stamps, and contacted the airport to confirm the timeline. Everything was done carefully, step by step. She even coached both me and Isadora on how to present ourselves, how to tell our stories factually, avoiding negative expressions that could be distorted. That alliance, me, my slowly awakening son, Carol, the neighbors, Rebecca, and the person who had been used, gradually took shape. I felt a strange new strength, no longer the lonely trembling in the dark, but a group of people united for the truth. I knew the road ahead was still full of thorns. Araceli would not give up easily. She had money, connections, a lawyer ready to attack, but this time, I was not alone. And that made my heart stronger, even if the smile on my face still hid so much exhaustion. I touched my notebook, looking down at the words that had borne witness. I whispered to myself, "We have allies now. It's time to turn pain into justice." The day of the hearing began in a heavy atmosphere. I sat in the front row, my hands clutching the notebook that had seen me through so many sleepless nights. The courtroom was packed, the harsh lights making every face look tense. Stephen sat ahead of me, his face gaunt as if he had just woken from a nightmare. Matthew sat beside me, his eyes innocent but resolute, his small hands wrapped tightly around my trembling ones. The courtroom doors swung open, and Araceli walked in. Today she wore a chic black dress, her hair styled perfectly, her lips a dark red. Beside her were Miss Margaret, the experienced lawyer, and a middle-aged man in a blue suit who carried himself with an air of power. A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone recognized him as the businessman the tabloids had seen Araceli with on her secret business trips. The judge banged the gavel. his deep voice echoing through the room. This court is now in session. My lawyer, Rebecca, presented first. She laid out the chain of evidence: the passport in Isabella's name, the flight tickets to France that coincided with Ivan's phone call, the hotel receipts from New York, the neighbors' testimonies about her changing personality and demeanor, and even a handwriting analysis showing inconsistencies. Finally, she called Isadora, the girl who had been hired to impersonate her, to the stand. Isadora, trembling and tear-streaked, testified about the time she was forced to dress up as Araceli, paid to show up at the school or the supermarket. Her voice was choked with emotion, but every word was clear. The courtroom was frozen in silence. Araceli let out a scoff, then suddenly stood up. "Your Honor, all of this testimony is fabricated. I have a truth that I never wanted to reveal, because it is a painful family secret. I have a twin sister named Isabella. She is the one who was on those trips. She is the one who caused all this confusion. I never betrayed my husband." The room erupted in gasps. Stephen whipped around to look at his wife, his eyes wide with shock. I squeezed Matthew's hand, trying to stay calm. Araceli continued, her voice dramatic. "The passport? Yes, that's Isabella's. The flight tickets, the hotel receipts, all of it belongs to Isabella. And as for Isadora's claim of being hired, perhaps someone took advantage of our resemblance to stage this. I am innocent." Margaret immediately chimed in, producing a few old birth certificates, proving the existence of an Isabella Torres, Araceli's twin sister. But at that moment, Rebecca stood up, her words deliberate and sharp. If there really is a twin sister, why has Araceli never mentioned her before? Why is it only when she's caught having an affair on international trips that she brings up the name Isabella to shift the blame? Furthermore, the immigration records in France and New York clearly show fingerprints matching Araceli's, not anyone else's. Rebecca presented the forensic results from the international airport. The judge examined them intently, banging his gavel to restore order as the room buzzed with chatter. Araceli's face paled, but she tried to maintain her composure. She shot a quick glance at Stephen, then suddenly changed her tone. "If the court still finds me at fault, I won't deny it. But I am Stephen's legal wife. Regardless of what happened, I have rights to his assets, this house, the savings account, even the shares he owns in his company. I demand half. That is my legal right, protected by law for a wife." The murmuring started again. Stephen was stunned, his lips moving but no words coming out. I felt the room spin. After all the years of love, this is what my son received in return: blatant, shameless betrayal and greed. Rebecca immediately countered, "Araceli, you have just admitted it yourself. The trips abroad were in fact to meet your lover. This is premeditated adultery, with concrete evidence, witness photos, hotel receipts, entry and exit stamps. Your demand for a division of assets while the marriage was built on deceit is unreasonable. The state's marriage laws are clear. If one party is deceitful and commits adultery, their claim to assets will be restricted." The judge listened intently, taking notes. The tension in the room was palpable. Araceli began to lose her patience, her voice becoming shrill, her eyes bloodshot. "I sacrificed my youth for this family. I have the right to claim what I deserve. If not, I will drag Isabella here to show everyone just how complicated the truth is." Rebecca was unfazed. She placed a hand on my shoulder, nodded slightly, and then said loudly, "Your Honor, what we see here is a betrayer, using the twin sister card to evade responsibility, and when cornered, resorting to demanding assets. This is no longer about love, no longer about marriage, but simply about exploitation and greed. Miss Stella Brooks, the widowed mother who witnessed it all, is a living testament to this truth. It is time for the truth to prevail. The room fell silent. I stood up, my voice trembling but clear. My son deserves an honest wife. My grandson deserves a mother who knows how to love, not deceive. I am not afraid anymore. I have seen. I have heard. I have recorded it. I will protect this family to the end, even if I have to lose everything. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I saw a light flicker in Stephen's eyes. For the first time in a long while, my son looked directly at the truth, his gaze firmer than before. The judge banged his gavel again, his voice stern. The court will deliberate and issue a ruling on the division of assets. But the evidence of adultery is clear. This court is adjourned. The sound of the gavel echoed, closing a stressful day. I knew the battle wasn't over, but the lies had been exposed before justice, and greed had spoken for itself. The day of the final verdict arrived. The courtroom was more crowded than before, the air thick with anticipation, as if all eyes were waiting for the moment the truth would be sealed with the bang of a gavel. I sat quietly, my hand holding Matthew's, the notebook still in my coat pocket, like a faithful friend who had accompanied me to the very end. Araceli sat on the other side, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together. Beside her, her lawyer Margaret arranged papers, but the businessman was nowhere in sight. Stephen sat in front, his back straight, his gaze determined, though it still occasionally drifted as if he were waking from a long, terrible dream. The judge entered. The entire room stood. He sat down, his deep voice resounding. After reviewing all the evidence, witness testimonies, along with the forensic results of the passport and entry and exit stamps, the court concludes that the defendant, Araceli Torres, engaged in adultery during the marriage and also exhibited deceptive behavior by using another's identity to conceal her actions. I felt my heart pound, my eyes welling up. Regarding the request for division of assets, the judge continued, the court largely denies it due to the deceitful conduct. The defendant is only entitled to her demonstrably contributed personal assets, but has no claim to the primary residence or the main savings account of the plaintiff, Stephen Brooks. Temporary custody of the minor child, Matthew Brooks, will continue to be granted to his paternal grandmother, Stella Brooks, pending further court decisions on long-term custody. The gavel banged. The courtroom filled with sighs of relief and whispers. Araceli jumped to her feet, screaming, "This isn't fair! I deserve half! I sacrificed for this family!" But her cries were lost in the heavy atmosphere. Stephen turned to look at his ex-wife, his eyes empty, then turned away, as if everything had finally closed within him. I hugged Matthew, tears streaming down my face, but I was no longer trembling. I knew. At last. I had protected my grandson, had preserved some peace for my son. The next day, as I stepped out of the courthouse, the wind was cold, but my chest felt light. Carol ran up and hugged me, a radiant smile on her face. "You did it, Stella. You did it." Rebecca shook my hand, her voice serious yet gentle. "Justice is sometimes slow, but it arrives. What you did wasn't just for your family, but for other women suffering in similar situations. You spoke up, and the truth was heard." I nodded. But in my heart, I knew this victory wasn't about gloating. It was about learning to love myself and teaching Matthew an important lesson. True love cannot be bought with money, and freedom of the soul is the most precious thing of all. That night, I sat in front of the mirror. The woman in the reflection was still me, old, her eyes marked by time, but her gaze was different. There was no more fear, no more trembling, only a sense of peace. I thought of my late husband, of the years I had sacrificed, of the buried sorrows. I whispered, "My dear." I finally stood up. I didn't let our family be dragged down. I protected our grandson. Matthew ran in and wrapped his arms around my neck. "Grandma, we're free now, right?" His voice was clear as a bell. I hugged him tightly and nodded. "Yes, we're free. Free in our hearts." From that day on, I learned to live more for myself. I took a walk every morning, planted more flowers in the garden, and continued writing in my journal. But now with smiles instead of tears. I taught Matthew how to bake, how to write thank you letters to those who helped us. Stephen still had a wounded heart, but I saw him reviving, slowly finding the light in his eyes again. Araceli disappeared from our lives, leaving a deep cut. But from it, we also learned how to heal. And I understood that sometimes what we think is an end is actually the beginning of a new journey, a journey to reclaim our dignity and find peace within our own souls. Dear friends, my story ends here. I went from dark days, betrayed and cornered, to finding the strength to stand up, to protect my family, and to win back my own freedom. If you are going through similar pain, please remember, no one can take away your dignity and the freedom in your heart unless you let them. Thank you for listening to this long story. If it touched you, please support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing so we can continue this journey together. Every bit of your support is a huge encouragement for me to tell more stories about truth, resilience, and a love that money can't buy. Thank you so much.